The regular North Carolina school year is officially over, but the heat over how poorly teachers are paid is nowhere near settled. Hundreds of teachers, school staff and board members, parents, and even students have shown up at rallies and Buncombe County Commission hearings as recent as last week. They're calling on county officials to meet living wage standards by raising local supplements to match other North Carolina districts with high costs of living.
In a way, this conversation is pretty similar to what a lot of industries in Buncombe County are going through with how to pay workers a wage that they can survive on here.
I'm Matt Piken, and this is The Overlook, a daily podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. My guest today is Greg Parlier, a recent addition to the reporting staff of Mountain Xpress. We break down the stalemate over salaries within Asheville City and Buncombe County school districts, which are both overseen by county officials. We talk about the politics involved at the local and state levels, the limited impact of teachers' associations, and how the proliferation of charter schools is affecting teacher pay. It's easy and economical to promote your event on this podcast, whether it's an upcoming play, concert, fundraising gala, or anything else you want my audience to know about. I can talk up your event right here for as little as $40 an episode. To hear sample ads and order up your own, go to podavl.com/advertise. Just fill in a few details, pay right on the website, and I'll do the rest. That's podavl.com/advertise. I began my conversation with Greg Parlier by asking whether teacher pay is a breaking point issue at public schools everywhere.
It's definitely an issue everywhere, particularly if in the Southeast. If you look at average teacher pay nationwide, some of the lowest are sprinkled around the Southeast U.S. North Carolina, I think, is 46th in average starting salary, 36th in average teacher pay overall. So it's a problem around the country for sure, and especially in North Carolina.
You mentioned the Southeast initially as particularly low pay. What are the factors leading into why our numbers are low for teacher pay here?
I'm not really sure. There's definitely some politics at play in this, and you would think it would be pretty tied to the economies of these states, and it likely is. I mean, it certainly is to some degree. It does seem like politics is a big part of it, and Republican-led states tend to be near the bottom of that spectrum.
Well, if we can't connect it directly to just, hey, it's a lower cost of living across the board, the economies are lower here, so we pay teachers less, you're citing politics. Let's talk about why politics come into play. We can take each of these things one by one, whether it's the drive for privatizing education, whether it's the belief that public education or public schools are quote unquote failing. So where do the politics come in, and can you draw a line historically about when public education started becoming a political football?
There's speculation that can be had for sure. And there's definitely, when I was in Florida 10 years ago or so, there was a big push for charter schools around the state. And I think that the conversation generally was parents wanted a little more control. And so they thought that this was a way to get more control. Whether that's really the case or not, it may not be the case really, because you lose the public funding element and the school board meetings and such.
Aren't charter schools publicly funded to some degree?
Charter schools are publicly funded, but they're sheltered from like the local public school boards, and they have less requirements of the teachers as far as certification and some standards. They don't have to have as high a percentage of their teachers having certain certifications within specific schools that public schools have to live up to.
That's, in a way, it's mind-boggling, and it seems like, and correct me if this analogy or this way of articulating it is off base, but it seems like by having a charter school, you can enjoy public funding without the regulation. You can operate like a private school, but you get public funding. Am I off base in that?
To some degree, that's true. But I think there is a freedom, and I think a lot of parents, teachers, maybe even administrators appreciate the freedom to not having to be tied to some curriculum standards and approaches that may come in public schools. And so that can lead to more creativity in some cases. And I think there's an appreciation for that in the charter school community.
I moved here from Minnesota, where charter schools are huge. Is it mushrooming here, and particularly in Western North Carolina, in ways we weren't seeing a decade ago?
I don't know if I would use the word mushrooming. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I will say in Buncombe County and Western North Carolina at large, the trend is pretty regular. Now, the pandemic kind of threw a wrench into everything as far as line graphs of trends, so it's hard to decide how that messed it up. But there's definitely a direct correlation between the decline in public school admissions and charter school admissions. They're in direct opposition to each other, and charter school admissions are growing, and there's new charter schools popping up every couple years.
When you have admissions drop in regular public schools, and you have teachers being hired at charter schools who don't have the level of training and certification that public school teachers are required, are both those factors driving down salaries?
I don't think the certification issue is really relevant necessarily to pay. So public schools are funded in two ways. One, at the state level, directly as a formula of how many students are attending their schools. So when admission rates drop in regular public schools, the schools get less money, and that's just how it works. And when admissions go up in charter schools, those schools get more money. So as that continues, it makes it harder for public schools. As they lose admissions, they lose money, they lose the ability to attract students, they lose the ability to attract teachers, and it definitely directly relates to teacher pay when the school systems are getting less money.
Can charter schools pay teachers whatever they want differently than public schools can? Are there teachers' unions, for instance? Is there any mechanism in place to have starting pay or foundational starting pay in public schools that does not exist in charter schools?
No, they're still required to get like a baseline pay from the state. Where school pay really differs is from the local levels, from county to county and district to district. They all are in charge of a local supplement that is paid on top of a baseline from the state. So that's where local governments, school boards, and individual charter schools have a little more control over how much their teachers make.
So where are you seeing the politics coming into play in a way that is tamping down or limiting teacher pay?
I think a lot of the politics is really happening at the state level, and the more general conversation over the difference in philosophy in how much teachers should be paid. In fairness, at that state level also, they are setting a baseline pay. I think the idea is this is the minimum of what teachers should pay in some of the most rural, maybe poorest counties in the state, and the more wealthy counties need to add on top of that with these supplements to adjust for cost of living and stuff.
But how are the politics playing out, particularly in Western North Carolina, in a way that is becoming a huge issue for teachers, or at least that they're speaking up loudly about lately?
Yeah, so the conversation has really grown in the last couple years from teachers and staffers of schools.
Let's be clear, there's Buncombe County schools and there's Asheville City schools. And I'm sure you were probably going to get to that. So talk about the differences between the two and how the governance works between the two.
Yeah, it's a really interesting setup that goes back decades, and most counties have one county school public system. Here we have the Asheville City system too, and the Asheville City system is much smaller. It is centered around just Asheville High School and then middle schools and elementary schools in the city, but it doesn't line up directly with city limits, so it's very confusing. That's another story. So the Asheville City Schools and Buncombe County Schools, the Buncombe County Commission has the power to give money to both school systems, and they have ultimate final say over their ultimate budgets locally. So Asheville City Schools has had an appointed board by the Asheville City Council for years until the last election. Last year, we just had a new elected board at Asheville City Schools now, which is a big change.
Talk about that a little bit. So you're saying previously Asheville City Council appointed the board.
Yeah.
Now it's an elected board. Why did that change happen? Who led that change?
There was a big push from a lot of advocates in the Asheville City Schools system, parents that wanted a little more control. There was a lot of controversy over the closing of an Asheville primary school in the last year, and I don't know a whole lot about that particular situation. I just know that it really helped balloon the controversy within that school district, and so people wanted more control, and they felt that an elected board would give them more say in what was going on in Asheville City Schools. They also lost their superintendent, so for the past year they've had an interim superintendent, a veteran of schools that kind of put a calming finger on the pulse for this year while the board got their feet under them and learned what they had to do and how to work through a budget season. We just went through the first budget season with the elected board and the interim superintendent, and they just elected that board a new superintendent to take over July 1st.
I imagine that just because parents want more control doesn't mean that has to happen. It's under probably an ordinance somewhere that city council at that point was in charge of appointing a board.
Yeah.
With everything that's been happening with losing students to charter schools, maybe private schools, do you think there was some pressure on Asheville city officials to acquiesce to that, to parents who wanted more control, saying, if we don't allow Asheville City Schools to have their own board that we don't appoint, we're going to lose more and more students? That at least this is a way to keep parents invested in Asheville City Schools and not lose more students to private and charter schools.
Yeah, I think so. And the fact that this is such a unique setup, having a Buncombe County, a county school district with all the schools outside of city limits, and then an Asheville City district, it's just such a unique setup. In fact, I think there is a undercurrent conversation of maybe merging the two school districts. In fact, Buncombe County Commission had it in their December budget priorities to consider merging the two school districts. That conversation's been put on hold because of the new superintendent at both Asheville and Buncombe County schools within the last year, and the new elected board at Asheville City. So that conversation's on hold, but there's definitely I wouldn't call it a threat to Asheville City Schools, but there's just like this feeling, especially from the Buncombe County schools side of things, like that why do we have this second administration, second board, and just entirely second school district? We could merge all of them, put them under one umbrella, and maybe have more resources that way.
You said that that's an open question. Why do we have that? You said Buncombe County funds both schools. And so do Buncombe County officials, does the Board of Commissioners control this decision? Could they decide without any input input from Asheville City officials? Could they say, we are going to take Asheville City Schools and put them into the Buncombe County umbrella?
I believe so. I'm a little unclear on the previous setup with Asheville City Council appointing the Asheville City Schools Board and how that translated to control for them. Now that they're elected, though, the only thing that is different about Asheville City Schools District than Buncombe County Schools District is they do have a special taxing district. So they tax, right now it's 10.62, I believe, cents on every $100 of value in the Asheville City Schools District, different than Asheville City limits. That is an extra taxing district, so they have this extra pool of money coming in that way that the county doesn't.
You're talking property taxes.
Property taxes.
So, first of all, are Asheville City Schools teachers paid at the same rate as Buncombe County Schools teachers?
They start with the same state base, but they have a different supplemental pay rate. It's not that they're pretty similar. We're working with the same cost of living essentially in Asheville and Buncombe County at large. So they mirror each other but the two boards ultimately have control, the school boards, on what that supplemental pay rate is, and then they can make independent requests of the county commission for their budget so that they can adjust those supplemental pay rates.
The Overlook is going live. My first live podcasting event features a conversation with Asheville Symphony Music Director Darko Buderitz. Black Asheville leaders tell us what they think about the city's commitment and progress toward reparations, and the resident rogues will talk about and perform songs from their upcoming record. That's 3 episodes of The Overlook in one evening. The Overlook Live happens Wednesday, September 27th at the Wortham Center. Tickets will be $30 when they go on sale to the public, but anyone joining my Patreon campaign in June gets in free. Go to patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. What are you hearing or feeling from Asheville city schools, parents, teachers, people associated with those schools about the idea of being merged into Buncombe County schools?
It seems folks within the Asheville city system like having the Asheville city system. I think they feel they have a little more access. It's obviously a smaller district.
Aren't there only 5 schools total? Or how many? There's Asheville High School, and then how many middle schools, how many elementary schools?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's Asheville High School, Asheville Middle School, and then a number of elementaries. I can't remember the exact number. The budget is $90 million for Buncombe County schools, and Asheville City gets about $16 million.
That's solely because of the difference of school totals.
Totally, right? About admission rates, yeah.
So what are you hearing from teachers in terms of their protestation about pay? Is it just normal grumbling, or is there something afoot here where we could see walkouts, or we could see threats of unionizing? Are we reaching a point that this is going to be a point of real contention for the boards of both school districts?
I think we're at the point of contention. Just a little background on the union point. North Carolina is a right-to-work state, so we don't have unions technically. There is an agency that self-describes itself as a union, Buncombe County Association of Educators and Asheville City Association of Educators, both basically overlapping but focused on the different school districts locally. They're all part of the North Carolina Association of Educators umbrella. So they are doing a lot of advocating and pushing for raising both teacher and staff pay. They held a rally in March in Pack Square that was pretty well attended. A couple county commissioners and school board members went from both school districts, and they've been making a lot of noise at all of the school board meetings this year. And really going back to last year, there was a salary study conducted by an outside consultant for Buncombe County schools in particular that did a lot of interviewing and talked to teachers and staff about their pay and made some pretty strong recommendations for a large increase in pay for both teachers and staff over a 3-year period. And some of those they pushed through year 1 last year, and the county commission approved it. And the Buncombe County schools and Asheville City schools got the county commission to agree to similar raises for year 2 and 3 of the study. They wanted to push it through this year, and that is in this year's county commission budget.
So when you're talking about the push for raises, this is not a push at the state level. This is a push at the local level to affect change that they think is more realistic to have happen.
It's much harder to make change at the state level, especially we're 4 hours from Raleigh over here in the western part of the state. The Buncombe County Association of Educators president, Shanna Peel, does go to Raleigh regularly, and she is a part of a group that is always pushing for state change. And the county commission talks a lot about pushing for raising the bottom level from the state. The state did make some raises. Last year, they set $15 as a minimum for classified staff, which includes janitors, bus drivers.
$15 an hour is like you can get that at Wendy's. That's right. Crazy.
A lot of those jobs, like the bus drivers, coaches even are just paid via stipends. They're not paid like an hourly wage on top of their regular duties if they have them. And a lot of them really struggle. I think a lot of teachers find their pay especially disrespectful because when you're a bus driver, for example, you have to work 2 or 3 hours early in the morning and 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the afternoon, and it's impossible to get a second job practically outside of the school system. And coaches, the same type of thing. A lot of coaches are driving their own buses now. We have a shortage of bus drivers as a result of this. So we've got coaches, we've got assistant principals driving buses around the county. And I think that there's just a lot of frustration and draining atmosphere coming from that side of things that just makes the whole environment more dramatic for everybody. Yeah.
So when we're talking about, when you're saying they're asking for substantial raises, what are we talking about? Can you give us a sense of what the median or average pay is now, or starting pay is? What can you quantify, and what are they asking for?
So the reason they're pushing at the local level more is because of this control of the supplement number. And there is a big pay scale depending on your levels of experience, certification. There's a national board certification that teachers can get. And also if you have master's or advanced degrees. That's a separate issue because the state abandoned in 2013 master's pay bonuses for all teachers in 2013. So it's been 10 years since if anybody has started a master's program after 2013, they did not get a bump in pay as a teacher since then.
That right there crystallizes a devaluing of quality education, doesn't it? I would think that's quite a statement that legislators at the state level said, we don't care if you have a master's degree. We're not going to award that. We're not going to incentivize that. You said a little bit ago we're a right-to-work state. I want to be clear. Anybody could unionize. We've seen unions at, for instance, Green Sage Cafe. Workers can unionize.
Yeah.
What is keeping the teachers from, you've mentioned these associations that kind of are quasi-unions, but what's the difference between how these associations work and their power versus what a union would be?
They're certainly organizing and lobbying state and local governments. So in that way, they are a union. And when you ask them about it, they say, yes, we are a union.
But they can't affect, we're going to have a vote among our union members. And if our union members vote to, for instance, go on strike, then we will have a strike. That's not this kind of an association, correct? Or are they?
Ultimately, I think this kind of comes down to the definition of a union that, to me and to them, I think to most people, it's maybe not so important what we're calling it because they are organizing. They're getting this statewide umbrella of an organization that has more resources than they do locally, and they're fighting for the right to make more money and have a living wage. And so they feel like they are doing that. They show up at school board meetings wearing matching shirts and have organized talking points.
Do the teachers have the support, from what you can tell, of parents to earn more money?
Definitely. There's been several parents speaking at both of the school district board meetings in support of teachers. I've talked to a couple of them independently, and they are equally perturbed at the difficulty retaining and mainly recruiting new teachers to this district. And part of the reason it's so much worse, so much harder in Buncombe County than maybe other places around the state, as we've discussed, the state levels are not great, is because our cost of living is the highest here. And while we have the highest cost of living of any other metro area in the state, our supplement pay coming from our local government lags anywhere from 6th to 12th, depending on how you quantify it.
So what are you hearing from the officials who are responsible for the purse strings? Are they sympathetic to the arguments, or are they saying our hands are tied? We only have so much money to work with. We want to pay you more. We literally can't. What are you hearing from officials who are in the position of doing something about it?
The first stop for these teachers is the school boards, and the newly elected Asheville City Schools passed a budget proposal, because then they have to take it to the county commission, that it meets almost all of the demands of the Association of Educators group. And they $20 minimum wage for classified staff, which is just below Just Economics, $20.10 an hour, released this year, which is what they were asking for, and a 7% raise for all teachers, which is great. And at the county level, they also passed a budget that gave a 7% raise to all teachers. Not quite as robust a raise for classified staff, brought them up to 18 and change, but huge asks of the county commission from both school boards to get teachers what they're asking for. However, both school boards bring that to the county commission, and the county commission, while being supportive in voice and in the conversation at the budget workshops or at county commission meetings, acknowledging the issues that teachers are facing, but basically saying, look, the state needs to raise the base level, and we are doing the best we can and giving you as much as we can.
Tell us, we haven't talked about this yet. Is there an across-the-board percentage of teacher pay that comes from the state and a percentage that comes from local entities?
No, the state just sets baseline pay, and depending on your years of experience and your board certification at this point, since master's pay is out the window, except for those grandfathered in. Locally, local government, there's a lot of districts that don't have any supplemental pay on top of the state level. Those are very rural districts with low cost of living. Just to put some numbers on it, Asheville City Schools was asking for $20 million, which included that special tax rate raise. They're going to get $16.8 million in the current proposed budget. Even worse, Buncombe County is asking for almost $116 million. They have $90 million slated for them. So that's a $26 million shortfall. The school district's going to have to figure out who doesn't get paid out of that.
Actually, though, when you do the quick math, I would think that's about close to the same. It's about 75% of the request. Now, what do those numbers represent? Do those numbers represent all-time highs in terms of county funding? Has the county and the city, have they never put as much funding towards schools as they are with this proposed allotment?
I believe that's true. Yeah, certainly in recent history. But the cost of living is still outpacing those increases. So in a way, this conversation is pretty similar to what a lot of industries in Buncombe County are going through with how to pay workers a wage that they can survive on here.
Not that social media or Reddit threads should at all be the barometer of how everybody is thinking, but all you hear people doing is trashing the quality of public schools. Do you think the rhetoric around that is part of the problem, is that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy? People believe that public education is losing quality, and because of that, we're not going to fund this drain on our resources, and that isn't serving our children anyway, so we need to do something about it. Is that all part of this?
Yeah, that rhetoric is pretty poisonous to the public school system for sure. And to Buncombe County Schools' credit, we have a ton of really experienced and certified, a high level of national certified teachers, which is interesting because the published teacher supplement here, it ranks 6th around the state at $8,200. Which sounds really good when actually a very small percentage of the teachers actually make that or more. And that number is really relatively high compared to what most teachers around here make, is because we have so many experienced teachers. All that to say, teachers have been putting up with low pay for decades, and they have a ton of passion here. And while they're fighting and think that they should be paid something that provides them enough security to not need 2, 3, 4 jobs, they care deeply about what they do for a living and the kids that they serve. And I think that there's a lot of value in the public school system here based almost entirely on the backs of the teachers themselves.
But Greg, you're talking about how there are some enormously qualified,
Yes.
hyper-qualified teachers here, yet they are not being rewarded at the state level for that level of hyper-qualification. I've heard that retention is an issue, that teachers are leaving. Is that true, that at least locally, Asheville City Schools and Buncombe County Schools, are they losing teachers?
They're losing teachers. There's a greater threat of loss. Anecdotally, everyone has 4 or 5 colleagues within the teacher community that have one foot out the door already, just because they're so drained. There's more of that than actual retention issue quantitative numbers at this point, but I think everyone is so concerned within the community that they're going to lose everybody. Everyone has a story of someone that they know that has left, but more have a story of more people in their circle that have a foot and a half out the door, just going to private industry just because they're tired.
And they have targets on their backs, literally and figuratively, that a teacher can be fired over something they say in a classroom, a word that gets uttered. They can't talk about a certain book. There's so many trigger points right now, aren't there, for teachers? Like, who can blame anybody for feeling like, screw it? I love teaching kids, but there's no security here. I've got this master's degree and I'm paid the same as this person who barely got a certification. Yeah. At least from the state level, I'm barely paid differently. What is their incentive to stay other than the mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that issue that we hear generally from the general zeitgeist is they're not talking about that. They're scared about what they say in the classroom. They're scared about this outside perception. I think a lot of them are really pretty hyper-focused on what their job is and, unfortunately, their own survival and their own budgets. But they feel generally disrespected to not get paid anywhere near. Just to give one example, one teacher I talked to yesterday she's a sign language interpreter for Buncombe County Schools, and she needs all kinds of certifications. She's basically she's an interpreter, but she's basically teaching deaf and hard of hearing kids. She's making $19 an hour, and that's insane because in the private industry, someone with her certifications would make $50 or $60 an hour, and 19 is just a slap in the face. And at one point she had 7 jobs to make at one time to make ends meet, just doing all kinds of different things. And that's just so an example of the disrespect and that they feel. And I think even more than pay, which obviously you got to put bread on the table, but I think that they are more passionate about how disrespected they feel.
I want to thank my guest today, Greg Parlier, a reporter with Mountain Xpress. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes are online by 6 a.m. every weekday wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at podavl.com. And please support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.